Bonjour à tous, bienvenue et merci à l'Université et à l'Autorité de la concurrence pour cette invitation. Je vais m'exprimer en anglais pour la suite, puisque plusieurs membres de ce panel sont anglophones. Si, pour toute difficulté, vous avez donc la traduction pour ceux qui sont arrivés plus tard. Vous avez des casques qui sont à votre disposition pour de la traduction simultanée. Donc je vous invite à vous équiper, le cas échéant maintenant, pour la suite des débats de ce soir. Vous me verrez aussi un peu de travers comme ça, puisque la caméra est là-bas. Donc pour nos intervenants en ligne, je voudrais éviter de leur tourner le dos. Donc je vais me contorsionner un petit peu. Mais donc voilà, soyez pas surpris si je m'adresse surtout vers la partie droite de la salle pour moi. So, welcome to this panel, or this roundtable tonight. And thank you for joining us. I'm Pascale DÉCHAMPS. As Stéphane was saying, I'm an economist. I'm part of the prospective committee of the Authority of New Caledonia. This was set up last year, and it's a group of people who are just willing to give a bit of time to help and support on specific issues the authority. So I was kindly invited to be the moderator of this panel. For those of you who will come tomorrow, you'll see much more of me again. I'll be moderating quite a few roundtables tomorrow as well. This first roundtable is to set the scene for tomorrow and Friday. With the speakers, we'll touch on some current worldwide trade environment with someone from the WTO, and some more specific aspects that apply to New Caledonia. And we'll also review how competition policy can support economic development and trade integration. In order to do that, there'll be 4 speakers in this panel tonight. Roberta PIERMARTINI from the WTO. She's the Chief of Department in charge of the trade cost analysis. There'll be Mia MIKIC. She's a senior trade economist, and her career combines academia and international organizations. She spent many years working in the UN in the Asia-Pacific region on trade, investment, and innovation. We have Benoît COEURÉ, that Stéphane introduced earlier, who's the president of the competition committee of the OECD, as well as the president of the mainland France competition authority. And then Laïssa Roy, who's to my left and been introduced before as professor at the university here in New Caledonia. I will start with Roberta. I think they're all online. Maybe we can put them bigger on the screen, if it's possible. Okay, we'll see when they speak. Maybe they'll become big. So Roberta, good morning for you. And maybe I can start asking you a question. What is the outlook of the world economy for trade and trade policy, in your opinion? And have trade and the WTO still have a role to play?
Thank you, Pascal, and good evening to all of you in New Caledonia. Thank you to the organizers of this section. Let me just start to clarifying that my comment today will be representing my position and not the position and the opinions of the WTO and its members. But turning to your question on the current trends, there is absolutely no doubt that trade and trade policy are going through very disruptive times, probably the most disruptive in the past 80 years. The United States have imposed double-digit tariffs on dozens of countries, various sector-specific duties or exemptions, have signed bilateral deals with some trading partners. Some countries have retaliated, and we are now used to frequent announcements and changes in announcements. To give some transparency, with the IMF at the WTO, we recently made public a full database of tariffs through a portal called the Tariff and Trade Data Portals that you can find through our WTO website. We have also been modeling what is the likely impact of all these measures. And early this month, we have published the Global Trade Outlook with our updated forecast for global trade this year, in 2025. We now estimate an increase, actually, at 0.9% of global trade. This is more of what we have foreseen in April, when we foresee actually a fall of 0.2%. And this is because actually the fact that some tariffs
Qu'est-ce qui se passe?
0.9%.
Recording in progress.
Trade flows is much below the 2.7% growth we had expected based on the conditions at the beginning of the year. We also see business dealing with the pretty sharp tariff increases. We have estimated the average trade weighted US tariff rose from around 2.4% at the beginning of the year to 18.4% in August. And for the world as a whole, on average, the trade-weighted tariff have doubled from 2.6% at the beginning of the year to 5.5% in August. So this doubling is nearly of the trade of the world average is nearly entirely driven by US tariff increases, because what we have not seen is a tit-for-tat retaliation, an escalating tit-for-tat retaliation, which is what, for instance, we had in the past seen at the time of the Smooth-Hawley War of the 1930s. Turning to trade, we estimate that the US share in world export could fall from 8.5% in 2024 to 2.9% in 2030. And the US share world import could fall from 13.6% in 2020 to 7.7% in 2030. We also look at how business react to these tariffs and looked at what's happening in terms of fragmentation of global trade. And what we have observed is that since 2018, bilateral trade between the United States and China have grown 30% more slowly than their trade with the rest of the world. And if we look at the world in general, so not just trade between United States and China and their trade with the rest of the world, but we did an experiment dividing the world in two hypothetical blocks based on the voting patterns in the UN General Assembly. And what we observe is that trade between the blocks has grown 4% slower than trade within the bloc. And this is a trend we observed since the war in Ukraine. So the world, we don't observe just a retreat of the US from global trade, but also a reorganization of world trade due to initially security concern, resilience of supply chain, and this is continuing now in part probably through the increase in tariffs. This is not good news for the US and not a good news for the rest of the world. Trade policy uncertainty is costly, and so are trade wars. And we have a model in the WTO that allows us to estimate what could be the impact of a world decoupling, so if this fragmentation goes on. And in our estimation, if we divided the world in two self-contained blocks, the resulting losses would be equivalent to at least a 5% fall in real GDP. Similar estimations have been done by the IMF. They estimate that losses are even as high as 7% of the GDP of real. This like Germany from global economy is not knowledge is sustained by foreign demand. If this is missing, the costs get higher. What we know is that despite sort of we read nearly daily of the death of WTO, we still have a large number of members, the vast majority of members trading under WTO laws, and on a number of bilateral regional trade agreements that build on the WTO framework. And what we hear from them is they want to reform the WTO, yes, but they want to continue living on a rule-based system. We have recently looked at what is the amount of trade that is currently take place under WTO tariff terms, what we call the most favored nation treatment, or MFN. That is that each member is the rate that each member extends to others on a non-discriminatory basis. And when we look at that, we calculate that even with all the US tariffs increases, the retaliatory measures we have seen from China, Canada, and other members, we are currently around 72% of global goods trade that continues to operate on most favored nation terms. This is down from 80% at the start of the year, but still a very substantial share of trade. We continue to monitor what is the amount of trade on the MFN terms. We do see potential for additional tension. For instance, if Chinese goods deflected away from the US, start pouring into other markets that might lead to trade defense action. But these trade defense actions are also potentially possible to be taken within the WTO framework. They don't need to be taken outside of the WTO framework. So we'll see how this evolve. What I would like to conclude with is a little bit, I mean, because it's not simply because I'm from the WTO, but I think it's important not to forget what the WTO has done for the world. And the WTO, the rule-based system has worked. We have now econometric evidence that show that the trade reforms have been have been boosting growth in developing economies and foster trade-led convergence. In particular, there are recent studies also show that WTO membership itself has boosted trade for members that have undertaken rigorous accession negotiations, growing by 1.5 percentage points faster than it would be otherwise. Now, not all economies have gained. In the World Trade Report last year, we showed that about since the creation of the WTO, 1/3 of low and middle income economies that represent approximately 13% of global population diverge from the rest of the world. But the factors we have identified as two main risk factors for these economies that diverged are high trade costs and lack of diversification of their economy, commodity dependence and diversification, the lack of diversification of trade. In both cases, it's not protectionism, the answer to sustained growth, but rather the opposite. We need more trade, we need to integrate more countries in the global economies rather than moving away from the global economy. And to finish, WTO has worked in the past and can also help in the future. This sounds like a slogan, but the future, what we have now is that we have to deal with the problems of the moment, and one of them, for example, being technological innovation, digital transformation. A lot of countries are putting in place regulations to deal with some of the challenges that the technologies bring, and security, privacy issues, and we want to avoid fragmentation of regulations. We need sort of cooperation to reduce and wasteful trade costs, allows for trustful flow of data, ensure IP protection, ensure the inputs necessary for this economy to provide the benefits that may lead to are traded. And for this, we need more international cooperation rather than less. And I stop here, and I'm looking forward for further discussion, questions.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Then maybe I can turn to Mia. Mia, what do you think is the current situation regarding international value chains? And how does the participation in global value chains help or hinder small economies, in your view?
Okay, thanks a lot. Well, just allow me to say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be in this conference. This is, of course, I would prefer to have been, with you there, but it's difficult to travel. That shows the issues with connectivity of Pacific Islands as well. And also thank you, Roberta, for providing me a very good entry point to explain the sign behind my back, which says Friends of Multilateralism. This is a small group established in Geneva, but operating globally that actually raises awareness exactly of the points that Roberta was talking about, of the value of global multilateral rules for trade, and try to sort of fight this very, very fast increase of different and unilateral policies. So just wanted to explain that sign because I'm involved with the group. And so Pascale, you asked me about the current state in the global value chains, and I think that cannot be divorced from the current situation in global trade that was so well explained by Roberta, because obviously the global value chains have driven the trade for a long time, and we know about the hyperglobalization and why this was become hyper, exactly because we had the liberalization of trade and other factors that allowed the factories to start moving across the border instead of only goods, and therefore we had this phenomenon of global value chains. And then everyone, of course, tried to become part of that type of global production and trade. So in commenting on what is the state of it now, let me go a few years back at the COVID situation, where I think for the first time, maybe we got, in a recent history, we got a very clear idea about the fragility of supply chains. and the shocks of disruptions really became clear and accelerated the processes that were put in place actually before the COVID, but were not so clear, of nearshoring and reorganization of supply chains. They were actually started by the key cog in the global value chains by China, because after the global financial crisis and around, until maybe mid 2013-15, China realized that it cannot only rely on the export growth directly from China, and started the policies or strategies of China plus one, and integrating some of the value chains with the nearby countries in Asia, as well as in North America through Mexico, and some even in Asia. But that has, I think, seemingly started to work very well. But the new changes that Roberta enlisted in trade policies, with the tariff increases and other non-tariff measures related also to various quantitative and direct control of trade flows, really impacted the value chains as well. Not so much in the actual reorganization that is supposed to be happening in response to those policies, but because of enhanced uncertainty and reduced predictability of for businesses in the context of where to produce, and how to combine the supply chain, and this really reduced predictability for the business has put stop in certain expansions of the value chains, even in those that are well developed. And of course, in parallel to that, the remnants of the changes and impact or stress on increasing the resilience also put in place certain policies like mandatory parallel importing or holding inventories, etc., for the improved resilience into different operation of the value chains. So the situation is very, very complex, not very clear where it is going. The fragmentation of the world trade that Roberta was talking about has direct impact on how the value chains will have to accommodate that, because imagine if the world really splits into two. Now the value chains are actually combined with the nodes from both of the worlds, so they will have to reorganize, and that will of course create much higher costs and uncertainties in the supply of many, not only consumer goods, but intermediate products and as well as services. So all of this actually complicates the situation for the small countries, because even in the best times, the small island economies are often left behind the major routes for these supply chains, simply because the distance or the isolation that they have, the small scale, in some of the cases, the lack of the necessary labor force that you need to use, the logistic costs, compliance, and all of these things that complicate participation in the value chains. So this really complicates the situation, and looking into what is possible. I think I always promote for the small economies, such as islands, but also there are some other small economies, to find the of triple S, which means to be strategic, selective, and sustainable in how to try to participate in value chains. So you can't do. You can't participate in everything. You have to be very selective in with whom, and most importantly, you have to make the benefits from that participation felt for a long period of time. So to be sustainable in both in the UN context of sustainability, which implies inclusivity and environmental responsibility. Now, how do you do that in the case of small island economies? I think you know there are structural difficulties that are extremely more difficult to combat in the situation of small economies than in the case of well-connected and larger economies. But it is not impossible to do that. We have many examples of many islands that have succeeded in that. I'm not going to go into details. Maybe we can go into in discussion time in that. But I would like to emphasize the importance of cooperation, and in that sense, not necessarily the formal regional trade agreements, but actually cooperation within the South-South small islands. And there are channels for New Caledonia to do that. I think it participated already in the UNCTAD small island development states, and this is one channel in which different frameworks for cooperation between South-South small island economies can be open, including pooling resources, exchange of knowledge, exchange of professionals, and of course finding the common voice in terms of putting ahead the objectives and the path towards the sustainable development. I know that I'm over the time already, but I just want to mention one important sector or industry that is in today's time, when we are all focused on tariffs and goods, often forgotten, and this is the importance of services, and in particular digitally delivered services. And I think for small isolated islands or countries that are far from the big markets, digital services is one way for growth and development that should be much more sort of explored and looked into than it is at the moment, and particularly when there are investments coming into digital connectivity, submarine connectivity and fibers, etc., or satellite. It definitely with the educated labor, it can provide quite a bit of growth boost. And finally, we often talk about the curse of resource-rich economies, and it doesn't have to always be a curse. It can, if there is a strategic approach to it, and foreign investment in exploration of resources or exploitation, combined with, for example, not only capacity building locally, because that may not be always necessary, but with creation of future funds, so that after the resources are used up, there is something to lean on. There is better prospects for such economies. So let me stop here in expectations of maybe some discussions later on. Thank you.
So Benoît, maybe I can turn to you now. So we've been discussing so far trade and the challenges of small economies, especially islands, to take part and what role to play in world trade. Now, typically, and as we've been discussing already, small economies are characterized by, small markets, so few producers are capable of achieving economies of scale. And then we tend to have fairly concentrated market structures, and especially if it combines with protectionism, the types of competition can be quite severely reduced in some markets. I was wondering, with your perspectives from the OECD as well as from the mainland competition authority, what role do you believe competition policy has to play in small island economies? And what do you believe are maybe the limits also of competition policy in this kind of situations?
Oui, merci Pascal. Je vais passer à l'anglais dans une seconde, mais avant toute chose, je voulais remercier les organisateurs de la conférence, l'autorité de concurrence de Nouvelle-Calédonie et l'université de Nouvelle-Calédonie en particulier, pour nous inviter à consacrer du temps à cette question qui est si importante pour l'avenir économique de la Nouvelle-Calédonie et des économies insulaires en général. Donc, merci d'avoir organisé cette conférence. So, shifting to English now, I would like to share a few thoughts on what competition policy can achieve, against the background that has been very well outlined by the previous speaker, that is a background where trade openness is very important, and the trade environment, the trade system is shifting globally, and also in an environment where regulation and other government policies, including industrial policies, are back at the forefront of the stage. And I would like to build on the experience that was built by the Autorité de la concurrence. Pascal, you said that Autorité de la concurrence is the mainland competition authority. Well, not quite so. Autorité de la concurrence is active in a number of small island economies in the Indian Ocean, in the Caribbean, so French territories in the Indian Ocean and in the Caribbean. We are also active in Wallis and Futuna in the Pacific. And although we're of course not active in the New Caledonia and French Polynesia, we are cooperating very closely with our sister institutions, ACNC and APC. And we've been active in international networks dealing with small island economies, and I'm going to come back to that at the end of my remarks. The first thing I wanted to say is that competition is more important than ever, which is not quite what you would conclude from what many politicians are saying nowadays. So there is industrial policy is back into fashion, and in the political discourse, in political rhetorics. There is a tendency to oppose competition and industrial policy as being a part of a trade-off, and I would like to explain that in fact there is a very strong complementarity between competition policy and other state policies which are aimed at supporting growth and innovation. I think one first reason is that, as we know, markets don't stand on their own feet. Markets need to be regulated. If markets are left to their own devices, the most powerful will crush the smallest. Prices will rise. Choice will shrink. and ultimately innovation and purchasing power will be eroded. So you need markets not to be left to their own devices, and that's what competition policy is about. It's even more important nowadays, where you see everywhere in advanced economies a trend towards concentration of economies. That is, the market power of the most powerful firms is rising. That is very true in the US, also true in Europe to a lesser extent, but still. And so, facing this trend for advanced economies to concentrate around the biggest players, you need strong competition policy. It's also very important at a time where innovation is key to achieving sustainable growth. Global growth faces lots of headwinds, and we've heard about that in the previous comments, particularly trade fragmentation, tariffs, geopolitical uncertainty. These are all headwinds that have a potential to severely curb global growth. So if you want to offset these negative forces, you need to innovate. So the good news is that there is plenty of innovation around, artificial intelligence being the first and foremost example of it. But if you want to unleash innovation forces, you need competition. There is no innovation without competition, because you need new players, new entrants to be able to enter markets and challenge the incumbents. And that's part of the role of competition policy, to make that happen, to make it possible for new entrants to challenge the incumbents. So that's one reason why competition is so important nowadays. And finally, it's even more important in small island economies, and we've already heard about that, because small island economies face higher transportation costs. As we know, they face markets which are narrower, when market depth is less. I mean, markets are narrower, shallower. And specialization can be high, and all these factors create a fertile ground for rent seeking and anti-competitive behavior. And so, if you accumulate all these arguments, what we see is that nowadays, and particularly in small island economies, strong competition enforcement is very important. And for that, you need strong competition authorities, which are independent, which the ACNC is, and which have enough resources, and which can deploy their resources across a number of activities, not only antitrust enforcement, which is acting against anti-competitive practices, but also merger control, of course, and very importantly, the advocacy role, the advice role of competition authority, that is stepping in the public discussion to throw ideas into the discussion, to steer the public debate, to inform the public debate about economic policy, and in an informed and independent way. And it is very much the case that the ACNC has done that in the past, and in a very useful way for the Caledonian economy. So that was my first remarks were really about stressing the importance of competition and competition policies in the current environment. Now, of course, competition cannot act alone. Competition policy needs to be consistent with other government policies. It does not operate in a vacuum. And to illustrate, let me say a word about trade, following also what the previous speakers have said, and let me say a word about industrial policy. When it comes to trade, and I'm not going to recast what has been very well said by the WTO colleague, you see tariffs coming in, you see fragmentation, a risk of fragmentation of the system. You see a risk of it's getting very difficult to predict what the cost of international trade will be. I remember this very weird episode in April when the Trump administration published their first table with suggestions for tariffs. And so you had this long list where, and when it comes to France, so we were surprised to see that some French islands had their own tariffs, according to the Trump administration. So La Réunion would have had tariffs of 37%. Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon would have had 50%. Don't ask me why. I still don't know. While Polynesia or the French Caribbeans would have had 10% tariffs. And by the way, Caledonia was not on the list. And it's not clear whether that was on purpose or just by accident. And so that's just an illustration of the kind of unpredictability that you see now. And you see a risk of unraveling of global value chains as they were set up or deployed in the recent decades. So small island economies are facing a particular challenge that they need to integrate the global economy. They need to integrate regionally if they want to find out what their comparative advantage is, and to be agile and to build their own comparative advantages in the global economy. The regional level is the first port of call and the right way to test it. But at the same time, this happens at a time where trade integration is being challenged, and trade costs becomes very unpredictable. But still, you've got to try. You've got to try hard. And I have to say, I was very, very happy to hear what the ambassador for the Pacifique said earlier today. Ce qu'a dit Madame l'ambassadrice sur le rôle du Fonds Pacifique, and what has been said about all the initiatives being taken to integrate New Caledonia into its regional environment with challenges. Because of course you've got to abide by the WTO rules. You've got to find the right approach, respecting the competences of the state and of the regional and of the regions and of the Caledonian government. And so it's not an easy exercise. But I do believe that it's very important to try to find, for Caledonia to find its own way to integrate regionally in a region which is very active and where a lot of regional trade links are being built today. So that's the first thing I think is very important. The second thing is about industrial policy, and as I said, there is a political music in Europe that competition policy has been hampering the implementation of industrial policy and has been standing in the way of building national champions and that kind of things. The reference for me is the report that was published by Mario Draghi last year, the Draghi report, which I think was very clear to explain that competition and industrial policy are not competing, but are complements. And the reason is very simple. The reason is that if you want to build a strong industrial policy to steer growth, to give the right impulse to your sectoral specialization, you need competition to be there for firms to be stronger. You cannot expect your companies to be strong on the global stage if they are not strong on the local stage. You cannot expose your firms to global competition, which we are discussing today, if they are shielded from competition at a national level. That doesn't work. You want them to be strong in the first place. You want them to innovate, and for that you do need competition. So there is a strong complementarity, both with industrial policy initiatives and also with regulation. Back in 2019, the Autorité de la concurrence published a very broad review of competition issues in French overseas territories. So New Caledonia was not included because this was about the territories where we have jurisdiction. So it was more about the Caribbean and the Indian Ocean. but I think that most of the conclusions would apply to New Caledonia and also to French Polynesia. And we found that the reason for high prices in overseas territories was a mix of competition issues and regulatory issues, which were limiting entry and contestability on markets. And also tax issues, particularly the special tax that we have in French overseas territories, which is called the octroi de mer. So that does not apply to New Caledonia. And we gave practical examples like restrictions on online trade, online commerce, licenses or exclusivities that rigidify distribution channels, a customs arrangement for online trade, and so on and so forth. So there are many practical issues that you face in overseas territories that are not strictly part of competition policy, but that resonate with competition policy. And if you want to open up, you need strong competition enforcement, and at the same time, you need to open up a number of regulatory and tax hurdles. And so that's also an example of complementarity. Finally, and that will be my conclusion, I would like to stress the importance of regional and global cooperation on competition. We have a strong framework for international cooperation on competition with the OECD Competition Committee, which I chair. Also, the International Competition Network, which the ACNC knows well. That's a global framework. You also have more regional or specialized fora, like the UNCTAD forum on small islands, which was mentioned already, which is very important. And I would also like to mention at a regional level the PINCER initiative. So PINCER stands for Pacific Island Network of Competition, Consumer and Economic Regulators, PINCER. PINCCER, in which the ACNC participates, and also the Polynesian authorities, and we also participate, being a Pacific competition authority, since we are also active in Wallis, and with strong leadership by both the Polynesian authority and also the Australian and New Zealand competition authorities, which have been extremely active and which have shown great leadership to organize these discussions. And this includes also the Cook Islands. This includes Kiribati, Solomon Islands, Fiji, PNG, Samoa, Tonga, and Vanuatu. So you have a broad range of local economies. And I really think that New Caledonia can play an important role in that forum, being both a small economy, but also one of the richest economies in that group, compared to all these small islands, together with, of course, Australia, New Zealand, and also Polynesia. And so I am very confident that the ACNC can take up all these challenges, given its excellent resources and its tradition of being very active in these discussions. But I would also like to confirm that the French competition authorities will support the ACNC and will find all possible ways to help. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Benoît. Thank you. I think you mentioned in the first part of your first set of secondary remarks, the interplay between competition and trade, and how does that, there are ways in which they combine to foster growth, or they can lead to challenging situations. And Laisa, I think you're on this panel, the person, of course, you are part of the university here, and you've been working in your research on the situation of Caledonia in the regional trade integration, as well as more generally on Oceania. And maybe you can tell us a bit more about sort of your perspective on maybe more practically here and for Oceania, what those these trade networks meant, and how Caledonia fits in that picture.
Thank you. Actually, in Oceania, if we start at that scale, there are three overlapping regional dynamics. Let's call it like that. First is regional integration, usually with the former colonial ascendants, the countries that used to be the colonial powers in the region. The second one is regionalization with Asia and Australia and New Zealand, and the third one is regionalism. So these are three terms. The first one, regional integrations, refers to the intensity of flows, trade flows, capital flows, migration flows, paired with institutional cooperation. And this is what characterizes the relation, for instance, between New Caledonia, French Polynesia, Wallis and Futuna, and France, or the relations between the Cook Islands, Tokelau, Niue, and New Zealand, or the countries in the northwest of Oceania, the Micronesian countries, with the United States. That is, they used to have a very specific colonial relationship with Australia, New Zealand, or France, or the United States. And these relations have changed politically, but still there remains strong ties, trade ties, usually a common currency, political association of different sorts. So, and this is visible in the trade orientation of most of the Pacific Island countries. I could say, tell me who was your colonial ascendant, and I will tell you who is your main trade partner now. This is the case for us as regards our imports. Most of our imported goods come from Europe and France, especially. The second dynamic is very different. It is a kind of spontaneous dynamics, actually. It is what we're seeing. We've seen over the last 2-3 last decades. That is increase in trade with Asia, with Australia, with New Zealand, without any kind of agreement, actually. Just spontaneously, we are trading a lot and more and more with our Asian neighbors and Australia and New Zealand. And probably the factor at work here is geography. It just makes sense. These are our neighbors, so we trade a lot with them, even without any institutionalized agreements. And the third dynamic is, again, another one. It is regionalism, and this is what characterizes the relations between the small Pacific Islands, actually. We do not trade a lot with one another for now. Usually it's around 2% of total trade. The trade we do with our fellow Pacific Islands is a few percent. But we are most of the Pacific Island countries are very active in regional fora, and they have concluded many agreements on fishing, on nuclear-free zone, on transportation, on trade also. And so this means that at the scale of the region, the Pacific Islands region, there are a will to foster cooperation, a will that does not translate into trade figures right now, let's be honest, but still a will to work together. And yeah, that's maybe a good point, a good place where to start. Those three dynamics overlapping. Besides those dynamics, all the Pacific Island countries, they benefit from a full panoply, many preferential trade agreements. That is an exemption of taxes when they export, when they enter the market of, for instance, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Canada, the European Union, the United States, Did I say Canada? I don't remember. And more recently, China, South Korea, India, Indonesia, Taiwan. That is all these non-Oceanian countries, they provide us with a preferential access to their markets. So this is intended to be an opportunity for us, Pacific Islanders, to develop our exports, and without reciprocity. In all those different preferential schemes, we are not intended to provide the same access. So that means that we can export abroad without paying any taxes or a few taxes, but we are not obliged to allow the import to enter our own markets. Okay, so this is intended to be, well, a kind of development policy or development-friendly policy. But actually, there are at least three limits to this preferential trade agreement. The first one is that the scope of this trade agreement usually is very narrow, and the export opportunity are limited because first of the red tape nature of these agreements. I mean, if we want to export, let's say, to our partner countries outside the region, we have a lot of administrative tasks to complete, and it is somewhat hard to deal with, or at least very time-consuming. And we know that we have small population, and maybe we need to focus our labor force on other more interesting activities than red tape. Second, this preferential access that we all benefit from has perverse effect, actually. Since those agreements, they give our export an artificial protection, which means that they tend to inhibit innovation and maybe reinforce the dependency of the Pacific Island countries. And the third, and maybe it is the most important point, all these preferential trade agreements that we benefit from have actually eroded over time, because most of our partners, they give the same preferential access to almost any country. So in concrete terms, we are supposed to benefit a preferential access for our exports, but this preferential access has eroded over time. This is the case for let's say, for many agreements. For instance, we are supposed to have, when I say we, I'm talking from the Pacific Island countries' perspective, we are supposed to have a preferential access to the European Union markets, but any country now has an access to the EU market with the EBA and everything but arms initiative, an initiative that says that if you export anything but arms, you can enter the EU market. So we do not have a real preferential access to the EU. It is the same for most of our partners. So, faced with this erosion of the preferential access of our export to foreign markets, the Pacific Island countries have negotiated regional trade agreements, starting in the 90s with the Melanesian Spearhead Group Trade Agreement, MSGTA. So this is a regional trade agreement which intends to reduce all the barriers to trade between 4 Pacific Island countries: Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Fiji. The second agreement is the PICTA, so the Pacific Island Countries Trade Agreement, which was signed by 12 Pacific Island countries. Same goal. The goal is to progressively reduce the barriers to trade between the member countries. And there is there are common points between those two agreements, MSGTA, between 4 countries, and PICTE between 12 countries. The point is that it has included over time a negotiation about trade in services, and also talks about labor mobility. And also those two agreements, they are open to the other Pacific Island countries, including New Caledonia. And the third regional agreement in the region is the PACER Plus, so the Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations. And actually, this is not only a trade agreement. This is a trade agreement and an economic partnership agreement, which includes, the reduction of barriers to trade in merchandises, but also trade in services, and investment, and also labor mobility. So the possibility for the member countries to travel between the member countries of the agreement. So many dynamics at work at the same time within a context of erosion of the preferences that we used to benefit from. All this leads to, I'd say, to cite Mia, something that looks like the 3S. I mean, these 3S, the term has not been used in the Pacific Islands Forum, but when you look and listen at what's being negotiated, definitely regionalism in the Pacific has 2 goals. Progressively liberalizing trade in goods and in services and investment within the region first, as a first step towards maybe multilateral liberalization. This is one objective. But another one, it's written all around. It's a regional strategy. Doing things together does not lead to huge trade flows in Oceania. However, it allows the Pacific Island countries to speak one voice. And this is especially important within the international organizations, especially for very small countries, speaking one voice, being able to defend our way of life, way of doing things, our own values. And so, this is what the trade ministers meeting always say, that regionalism is essential to addressing the common challenges faced by the Pacific Island countries, as well as leverage our collective regional voice in all the global engagements.
Thanks, Lisa. And I was wondering whether in 2 minutes you can tell us, we have a bit more time, but if you could tell us maybe about we were talking earlier about protectionism, competition, industrial policy, and what's your perspective on that in the context of Caledonia, given the, everything you've been looking into in the context of your research and also your knowledge of the local situation?
New Caledonia, the country, does not participate in those trade agreements for now. It became a full member of the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, which is the first step maybe towards engaging in the regionalism dynamics. This is no secret that New Caledonia is paradoxically an isolated protectionist country that looks inwards as regards its almost everything. Looks inwards and looks towards France, and but as far as isolation and protectionism are concerned, there are at least 4 factors that ensure that New Caledonia is kind of shielded from international competition. even more, I'd say, than the other Pacific Island countries. The first factor is, of course, natural geography. We are geographically isolated and protected from the outside world because we are in an island, like all the Pacific Island countries. And also, we are protected by our production structure. Most of our production is oriented towards the internal markets. So this is the first driver of this kind of shield from international competition. The second one is, of course, the very protectionist trade policy that New Caledonia has, both in terms of tariff and quantitative restrictions, which actually are contravene the WTO rules. So these are kind of illegal. But I think that they're in the process of being cleaned. But well, we have a very protectionist policy, which contributes to the very high cost of living, and yeah. And then factor number 3, precisely, is the costs here, the prices. We have very high prices reinforced by our protectionist trade policy. And these high prices are also an impediment to our competitiveness outside New Caledonia. It's very hard for us to export because we are very, very expensive. And so the prices are a barrier to competitiveness and export. And the factor number 4 is linked. It is the fact that we have an overvalued currency, which also reinforces high prices and is a barrier to competitiveness and to exports. So you said 2 minutes, I think it's more. Of course, the rationale for a protectionist policy, especially in a small island, is to protect the local industry and to protect the local employment. But there's always a price to pay, and the price to pay is precisely high prices and also less choices for the consumers. As well, again, as the reduction of competition in a small country where there are already dominant positions. So all that to say what? To say that, okay, the rationale is to protect employment, industrial policy versus paying high prices and having less competition. The point is that we do not have any evaluation of our trade policy. We do not know whether our protectionist trade policy really protects employment, really helps the development of industry. We have some indicators that these policies really are associated with high prices, but just to say that, like in many other areas in New Caledonia, we need to evaluate our public policies. Our colleagues at the large, Amélie Chung, Séverine Blaise, they are working on that with the CESE, the Economic, Social and Environment Council in New Caledonia, to help them put in place measures of, evaluation of public policies. And maybe we should add to the list of policies to evaluate the New Caledonia trade policy. That's it.
Thank you, Laisa. So that was to keep you awake towards the end of the day. Before the audience maybe has a number of questions, I was just going to go around the panelists one more time to check whether anyone maybe has further comments very briefly in light of what the other panelists have said. So Roberta first. I don't know whether there's anything you'd like to add, and I would just really encourage to be really quite brief, so that hopefully we have a few minutes for questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you. Just maybe very quickly to summarize a bit what has been said, and that somehow works as a good conclusion also from the perspective, from my perspective, is that it's undeniable that the external trade policy environment for small, open economies is less benign that has been in the past. But small economies, as we have said, can shape a new narrative, can be create coalition and together with others actually play a role in shaping trade policy and shaping also negotiation. They can be more active. They have the only option to grow on sustained growth for small economies, it is in an open market. But the new technologies are, despite what's going on in goods trade, are making services tradable and increasingly tradable, and there is therefore an opportunity to catch there, and that's what sort of access to global market give as opportunity. I heard in the Alaisa discussion this need to evaluate domestic policy. Says you keep market open, but you need a domestic policy right. And often we hear the trade policy is used, for example, to protect workers, but trade policy is not a policy to protect worker. A labor market policy, active labor market policy, education policies are infrastructural policies also, are policies that allow mobility of work and retraining to get new opportunities for new jobs that are there, well paid, and that could be got with the right environment. So open trade and good complementary policies, I think, is what work for sustained growth.
Okay. Mia, anything you'd like to add?
Just very quickly, because I think Roberta summed it up very well. You know, when I was a student, we were taught that actually free trade can replace a competition policy. And so in this disappearance of free trade policies, I'm wondering if competition policies may actually step in and protect what we did always nurtured through the free trade, which is really this smart governance, innovation, technology exchange, knowledge, and putting value on all of these things. So it's just I'm wondering whether we will go to that in that area. I think it's worth remembering what was said, that high level costs and lack of diversification are really leading to a lack of growth, and that happens often when we have high protectionism. And I think the type of protectionism that I have seen in case of New Caledonia is the old industrial policy type, where you have more emphasis on vertical protection and vertical policies rather than horizontal enabling, and that needs to be switched into the direction of smart policies where you really promote horizontal incentives rather than vertical ones. I can't say it enough. Value chains will survive. I'm absolutely sure in that they will reconfigure, and in that reconfiguring, perhaps smaller players may find a way. It needs to be remembered that they are not necessarily always blessing, because if you are stuck at the bottom of the so-called smiley curve, and then obviously it's not a benefit to either sustainable or inclusive development. But there are ways to capture value from those, and that needs to be strategically considered in all small economies. But having 95% of your export parked in one sector is not sustainable, I would think. And so serious consideration should be given to what was mentioned, to adding services to the package of economic activities, because they are also a good employer in terms of decent work, particularly when they are combined with knowledge-intensive activities. With AI and everything that is happening, I think that is not out of reach. We just need to have good governance. Good regulation is necessary for all of that, and having small countries involved in seeking the path to global regulation towards AI and digital things, I think is very important, because it will be important for future generation of these small countries as well. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Benoît, any few words?
Well, our discussion has been fascinating, and what I take away from our discussion is that this is really about choosing a growth model. It's not about you cannot slice and dice the discussion and address separately trade, regulation, state intervention, competition policy, and so on. It's about the model, and it's also not about the behavior of some players. And when I talk to politicians in French overseas territories, there is a tendency to kind of look away from it and try to name and shame specific players, like big vertically integrated retailers, and to flag anti-competitive behaviors. Which might be the case, and it's the job of competition authorities to look into it, to investigate, and to sanction if needed, of course. But you're not going to solve the competitiveness issues in overseas territories by acting on individual players. It's about choosing the right model. And what we've discussed today shows that there is a lot of complementarity. And in particular, if you go for a growth model which is entirely aimed at shielding local producers from international competition, which is by and large what has been done in French overseas territories and also in New Caledonia and to some extent in Polynesia, then as Laisa said earlier, there is a price to pay. So you've got to be honest to voters and explain that if you go for the protectionist model, which you are perfectly entitled to do, that's fine, but then there will be a price to pay, and this will be subsidized by local consumers, and presumably also this will come at the cost of lower innovation and lower growth. So if you want more innovation, if you want more growth, particularly in economies where the workforce is well qualified, which is the case in New Caledonia, you may want to embrace a model which is more targeted at innovation and growth, and for that you need openness, and you shouldn't be afraid of it. So my message here is: don't be afraid of opening up. You have all the assets that can make you succeed in the regional on the regional stage. Don't be afraid.
That's a message of optimism. So maybe, yes, I see hands going up. If we can, so I see you also have a microphone. Please don't hit it. I've been told don't hit it. The mic, I mean. So maybe you can just, just the guy behind you. If you can maybe state your name and then ask your question. And if it's a comment, please be brief. I would really...
Bonjour, Eric. Malheureusement pour moi, ce soir... je vais être le méchant, je suis un petit producteur local, et je m'inscris en faux. Tout ce qu'on a entendu ce soir, c'est n'importe quoi. Et je m'explique clairement. Que les gens de l'extérieur ne comprennent pas notre modèle, je l'entends fort bien. Quand les mesures de régulation dont il est question ne pèsent que sur 5% de la consommation des ménages calédoniens, dites-moi où nous sommes la raison de la cherté de vie en Calédonie. L'indexation, j'aurais compris. Le négoce, j'aurais compris. Mais me dire à moi qu'avec mes 5 petits pourcents, je pèse le plus lourd, eh ben non, ça ne marche pas les loulous, ça ne marche pas. On parle de protectionnisme, on va parler des États-Unis. Non, je déconne, on ne va pas parler des États-Unis. La vérité, c'est que visiblement, vous ne connaissez pas votre économie. Là, ça, je suis désolé, je suis confus de le dire comme ça, mais les chiffres, on les connaît. On les connaît, les chiffres. On pèse que dalle en termes de volume sur la consommation des ménages, mais en nombre de salariés et en termes de participation à la préemption fiscale, on pèse pas mal, finalement. Donc non, stop, il y a une entreprise sur 5 dans la production qui bénéficie d'une mesure de régulation. 1 sur 5. Quand je dis régulation, ça peut être simplement un quota, une petite mesure de taxation ou un stop. Mais les stops, eux, pèsent 0,2%. Ça pèse que dalle en vrai. Mais on préfère s'attaquer à ce qui nous semble dérangeant sans en comprendre ce que cela apporte en réalité. Et moi, me faire expliquer par des gens respectables, sans doute parce qu'ils croient à ce qu'ils disent, qui sont pour beaucoup d'entre eux les fossoyeurs du modèle européen et national, qui nous proposent un modèle qui ne fonctionne pas. Le monde ne fonctionne pas aujourd'hui en économie. Et je vais faire un truc plus simple. Ce n'est pas moi qui vais vous le dire, moi, petit Eric, de pas grand-chose. C'est monsieur Sutton, Alistair Sutton. On sait qui c'est, Alistair Sutton, qui nous expliquait, je me rassois pour lire, il y a peu de temps, il y a 5 ans, lorsqu'il est venu se rendre compte de ce qui se passait ici. Et il parlait des accords, PICTA, PACER, etc. Nous, on est contre, on n'est pas fous. Toutefois, les accords internationaux du Pacifique n'ont pas montré encore un dynamisme profitable aux petits pays de la zone. Ils ont plutôt favorisé les grands pays de la région. Voilà, j'ai rien à ajouter. Mais je suis disponible.
Merci. Alors, pour votre information, il sera là demain, Alistair Sutton. Alors, pas physiquement, il sera en ligne, mais il fait partie de la dernière table ronde de demain après-midi. Donc, oui. Mais vous pourrez éventuellement rebondir à ce moment-là, si vous êtes encore parmi nous, je le souhaite, mais de pouvoir aussi en parler avec lui. En tout cas, merci pour votre intervention. Monsieur ?
Oui, bonsoir. Merci pour cette conférence. Bravo à l'UNC et l'autorité à la concurrence, déjà. Bravo, parce que c'est une bonne thématique. Par contre, je pense qu'on a même un décalage. Moi aussi, je pense qu'il y a un gros décalage entre qui travaille tous les jours pour faire business, qui fait import-export et qui est peut-être fonctionnaire ou professeur académique. Avec tout le respect, hein, je ne veux pas faire un débat, mais il y a vraiment, je pense, un décalage énorme. Et ce n'est pas un hasard que la personne qui est en train de bouleverser le monde aujourd'hui, c'est un ancien homme d'affaires et pas un vrai politicien, Trump. Je suis désolé, moi je le mets dans le centre. Parce que c'est le seul qui a compris que peut-être il faut faire un peu de protectionnisme pour aider les travailleurs, pour avoir de bons salaires et de bonnes conditions, peut-être avec des prix un peu plus élevés, plutôt que se faire la guerre des pauvres et aller abaisser les prix, que ça va aider les classes supérieures. On voit maintenant la réaction de tous les droites souverainistes. Donc il ne faut pas être naïf ici. Donc j'espère, moi je ne peux pas venir, désolé, je dois travailler, je viens ce soir, demain, après-demain, nous on a des structures petites, et moi je suis un petit producteur de glace, mais franchement, mettez la terre au centre de cette discussion, parce qu'autrement on va discuter des théories, et vous êtes années-lumière, distance. Je dis à vous, vous faites de la recherche, ok? Moi je vous dis, il ne faut pas faire de grosses recherches. Le développement de la Nouvelle-Calédonie est énormément plus développé des autres îles autour de nous. Mais demandez-vous pourquoi. Il y a 30 ans, des politiciens très longimirants, long-term thinking, ils ont compris qu'ils devaient protéger une économie petite comme la nôtre, parce qu'on ne va pas être naïf, on ne va pas se mettre à confronter, à comparer avec la Chine, l'Australie, la Nouvelle-Zélande. On est 200 000, nous, hein. Les autres sont 25 millions, 4 millions, 1 milliard. Moi, je viens d'un voyage en Chine, je voulais faire la concurrence à la Chine, ou les international trade de la Chine. Et ils ont compris qu'avec un peu de protectionnisme, on a fait avancer ce pays. Et aujourd'hui, nous, en Nouvelle-Calédonie, je pense que vous devez être fiers. Moi, je suis un étranger, désolé, je ne suis pas un Calédonien. Et on a développé une industrie locale. Quelle est l'envie de la région Pacifique? Allez-y à Nouvelle-Pacifique, PNG, au Vanuatu, à voir le développement de l'international trade. Donc il faut arrêter de nous raconter des politiquement corrects. Regardons avant, heureusement aujourd'hui vous avez les États-Unis qui s'est réveillé, qui a compris qu'avoir des déficits commerciaux pour des années c'est un désastre. L'Europe est impuissante, c'est le résultat de ces politiques un peu comme ça, naïfs, je répète naïfs presque. Et je répète, donc faites pas trop de... Restez sur la terre. Restez sur la terre. Et après, dernier point, soyons pas timides. Et après, voilà, moi je suis préoccupé. Je vais vous dire un point de préoccupation. Vous avez parlé, quelqu'un de vous, de Vanuatu, ok? Comment vous pouvez imaginer? Moi j'ai fait des légumes ici avec des salaires moyens de 200 000 par mois et des coûts des structures, etc. à la française. Mais comment on va se comparer avec un accord de libre-échange avec Vanuatu, où ma collègue qui travaille à Vanuatu me dit salaire moyen 20 000. Mais vous voulez quoi? Moi, je veux bien l'accord de libre-échange avec Vanuatu, mais je veux aussi alors les salaires moyens à 20 000 francs ou 30 000 francs par mois. Et alors, on va faire l'accord international régional. Mais autrement, on est que des naïfs. Attention qu'on va répéter un cas comme la NAFTA, où heureusement les États-Unis maintenant, ils sont en train de dénoncer la NAFTA, parce que c'est une folie. Parce que c'est un privilège pour le Mexique, pour low-cost importation, ou pour le Canada, à détriment des États-Unis. Heureusement que les États-Unis, aujourd'hui, s'est réveillé. J'espère que bientôt, aussi, les pays européens, ils vont se réveiller. Donc, moi, le message que je passe à les conférenciers, demain, vous avez le temps, nous, malheureusement, on doit travailler, c'est réveillons-nous et arrêtons de parler politiquement correct. Merci beaucoup pour la conférence.
Merci pour ce commentaire et cette intervention. Est-ce qu'il y aurait d'autres questions éventuellement? Je crois qu'il y a une personne là-haut. Elle disait juste bonjour, non? Alors, je ne sais pas en ligne s'il y avait quelqu'un qui souhaitait intervenir. Moi, je n'ai pas vu. Non? On va s'en passer.
Excusez-moi, mais ce n'est pas une attaque ni rien. Pour s'assurer d'une situation économique intéressante, il y a un outil très simple, hein, c'est la balance commerciale. Voyez la nôtre.
Sur ces paroles, je vous propose de terminer ce panel. Je vais remercier Roberta, Mia et Benoît pour leur participation. Alors ce matin pour vous très tôt et puis ce soir pour nous. Encore merci pour vos interventions.
But just very briefly, saying, sort of going back to the topic of protecting jobs through tariffs. So let's say clearly you can protect an industry and make it bigger because with tariff, then it is in a competitive environment, fine. But this means that consumers are paying. So I totally understand the perspective of business people. What we're trying to look at is the perspective of a country that is not just made of business people, but also consumers. So we should not forget that tariffs are paid by consumers. And that's the only thing I wanted to say. And then the second thing on macro imbalances, they are important and they have been a source of trade tensions. But also in there, economics show you that it's not protectionism that change in macro imbalances, is more changes in macro policies like saving rates, for example. And the IMF, in fact, advised those economies with large macro imbalances to act on public investment or safety nets. So on variables that change the saving rates of a country, because that's what affects macro imbalances.
Mia, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Roberta is saying, is that, when economic analysis approaches the results of protectionism, we take into account all groups in the society, so producers, consumers feature as well. And so it is very clear based on empirical analysis, meaning measuring how prices react to tariff imposition in US, but also other markets before that it is the consumer that pays at least part of the tariff. Sometimes it is paid by the foreign supplier, but that is not indefinite because the margins of profit are thin, and so that is maybe the first instance. But then, as the tariff persists, the more and more of the cost is related to consumer expenses. And what happens then is that consumer, having a fixed income in a short term at least, has to make substitution of how that income is spent. So he or she will spend less on domestic products if the imported products that don't have close substitutes will become more expensive. Often these are intermediate products, and so industries will behave like that, and so they will not be actually growing. So it is actually a fallacy of saying that tariff protect growth and poor, in particular in this case of Trump policy, where the biggest impact actually on poor will be through tariffs, while the most of the income redistribution of the country will happen through the internal taxes that will actually stream the profits into the big corporations and large business sector rather than medium and small size enterprises. So the poor, through the various policies, not only tariff but also related to the taxation, will be affected the worst. And just one comment on NAFTA doesn't exist anymore. It has been replaced several years back by USMCA. That has improved the agreement, definitely put in place all the rules that US favored, and because Trump was a negotiator behind that agreement, it was supposed to be the best and the most modern agreement in the history of times. So it should have actually worked in the U.S. interest, and it did, in particular for the protection of the car sector. So I just wanted to put those broader elements in play when we are discussing the impact of trade policies and growth, particularly inclusive growth, because for inclusive growth, the trade policy is actually almost important. You have to have as said, the mix of policies that will lead to the inclusive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. And I think in the meantime, we've had 2 additional questions. Do we have time for 2 additional questions? We do. Okay. So, sir.
Bonsoir à tous. Je vais parler en français, bien que je puisse parler en anglais, mais ça sera plus rapide et efficace. Très intéressant le débat qu'il y a entre les 2 visions. Alors moi je suis plutôt de culture libérale, ayant fait une école de commerce. Je suis absolument convaincu que à l'échelle mondiale, ce qui est dit par les autorités de concurrence est vrai. C'est-à-dire qu'on a vu que lorsque les pays sont renfermés sur eux-mêmes, ça aboutit dans l'entre-deux-guerres à la récession, ça aboutit l'autarcie aboutit à des effets néfastes, et que de façon générale, l'ouverture des économies a des effets vertueux. Mais la vie m'a appris qu'il faut se méfier des certitudes absolues. Et que ce qui est vrai... Et donc là c'est l'avis d'un élu qui attend de ce débat très intéressant un éclairage sur ce que doivent être les politiques publiques en Nouvelle-Calédonie. Je pense que la vérité est plus complexe que ça. C'est-à-dire que ce qui peut être vrai dans un grand pays industriel, la notion par exemple de la surévaluation de la monnaie, dans sa capacité à exporter, n'est pas forcément applicable dans une petite économie insulaire qui n'a pas de base industrielle d'export. La Nouvelle-Calédonie, je rappelle, on exporte du nickel sous forme de minerai ou de métal, mais c'est tout. Nous n'avons pas d'exportation industrielle, donc il n'y a pas de valeur immédiate à baisser la monnaie pour nous rendre plus compétitifs. De la même façon, et ça a été dit, et c'est frappant cet argument que dit Eric, c'est que finalement les protections de marché ne pèsent qu'un pouillème dans une très faible part dans le panier du consommateur. Et c'est vrai que les dépenses, les voitures sont importées. Il n'y aura jamais d'industrie automobile en Nouvelle-Calédonie. Néanmoins, je pense qu'il faut qu'il y ait un débat constructif et respectueux des deux points de vue, parce qu'il y a sans doute des effets complexes à examiner. Le fond du problème en Calédonie, c'est qu'on a construit une très forte dépense publique, avec un secteur public hypertrophié, tout le monde fait le constat, grâce aux revenus issus d'un système fiscal assis sur l'importation. Et donc ça crée des rigidités qui nous empêchent aujourd'hui de faire des réformes, puisque lorsqu'on a mis en place la TGC, qui est la TVA calédonienne, on s'est complètement trompé dans la projection sur le rendement. Et donc on a très peur aujourd'hui de faire des réformes pour supprimer les taxes à l'entrée et tout basculer sur la taxe indirecte. Rajouter à ça le fait que si on supprime les taxes à l'entrée, qui sont clairement inflationnistes, on va rendre apparentes les protections de marché. Évidemment, il y a des résistances parce que ça sera difficile. Rajouter à ça le fait qu'il ne faut pas mettre tout le monde dans le même panier, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a des protections de marché qui ne font pas débat en Calédonie. Et il y a des protections de marché qui sont beaucoup plus choquantes psychologiquement, comme par exemple le chocolat, parce que c'est un produit de grande consommation, les prix sont vraiment très élevés, et donc il y a une forte opposition de la population sur ce sujet-là. Donc moi, je formule un vœu, c'est que votre débat puisse, au lieu d'être un combat dogmatique entre deux visions... alors c'est amusant, parce que finalement, les entrepreneurs défendent une vision protectionniste, les universités défendent une position libérale. C'est le monde à l'envers en Calédonie, on est aux antipodes. Mais donc j'aimerais bien qu'on fasse des études de cas. Et je serais par exemple intéressé qu'il y ait du benchmarking avec les autres pays insulaires, parce qu'au Vanuatu, qui est un pays ouvert avec des faibles salaires, je crois savoir que les biens alimentaires ne sont pas si bon marché que ça. Je crois savoir que l'Islande, qui est un pays... qui n'est pas aussi protectionniste que le nôtre, a des prix très élevés également. Donc il y a peut-être des causes structurelles insulaires. Voilà, donc l'électricité... Voilà. Donc j'aimerais que, si vous voulez, on ait cette approche très pragmatique, au cas par cas. Des fois, telle approche sera vraie, telle autre le sera moins. Je pense que c'est pas la même chose entre certains biens de consommation alimentaire, c'est pas la même chose avec les biens industriels, c'est pas la même chose avec les services. Donc voilà, donc aidez-nous à y voir plus clair par vos travaux. Merci.
Ah, il y avait une deuxième question, on va la prendre et puis éventuellement après on va voir si les panélistes souhaitent réagir
Merci. J'avais une question déjà pour Mme Laizarois qui était comment vous calibrez un pays protectionniste ou un territoire protectionniste. Voilà, entre 3 et 5% de positions douanières régulées, est-ce que ça correspond à un pays protectionniste quand on sait que les produits, lorsqu'ils doivent être exportés, se heurtent aux barrières des pays voisins qui sont, elles, potentiellement sanitaires ou d'autres formes? En tout cas, voilà, comment vous calibrez un pays protectionniste? Parce que je n'ai pas le sentiment que effectivement la Nouvelle-Calédonie le soit avec la proportion des produits qui sont régulés réellement et qui d'ailleurs sont peut-être de moins en moins, ce qui n'est pas forcément une actualité réjouissante. Mon autre question, alors je rejoins la remarque de M. Blaise, je me demandais, là c'est plutôt pour l'UNC et la CNC, si le colloque va servir à y voir plus clair sur puisqu'on a affaire à des scientifiques, donc la théorie va éclairer. Et pour garder ça simple, est-ce qu'on va avoir des solutions pour comprendre gagnant-gagnant, des accords? Alors, je pense que nos entreprises sont d'accord pour travailler la coopération régionale, mais déjà, pour continuer à exporter, il faut continuer à produire. Donc, et effectivement, de manière compétitive. Donc, est-ce que l'OMC, peut-être, alors je devrais peut-être le formuler en anglais pour la personne de l'OMC, mais je ne sais pas si je peux lui faire maintenant. So it's for you to keep it simple. Would it be possible to know during the event to know how to make a solution win-win for little territories who have to trade in the region, because we are very fond of to do that, but how to do it win-win? It's a very simple question, and I hope that with you, all scientists, we will be able to keep it simple and have some light on that quite complex question. Thank you in advance.
Okay, so I suggest we start with Benoît, because he wanted to say a few words and he did not pick up on the previous one. And then maybe Roberta, Mia, if you've got also some light to shed. Benoît.
Oui, je vais parler français puisque cette discussion est en français. Moi, je me félicite de cette discussion et qui prouve l'utilité de cette conférence. Si tout le monde était d'accord, ça n'aurait aucun intérêt. Donc, je suis très content que la discussion ait lieu. Et je trouve que ces questions sont trop importantes pour l'avenir de la Nouvelle-Calédonie pour se permettre la caricature ou le manichéisme. Donc, bien entendu, il faut protéger l'économie calédonienne, qui est une petite économie. Il n'est pas question d'ouvrir cette économie à tout vent, à la concurrence de pays, notamment dans la région, qui ont des salaires beaucoup plus bas. Donc, je suis d'accord avec certains des propos qui ont été tenus. La question, c'est comment est-ce qu'on peut faire bouger certains curseurs pour bénéficier de l'environnement régional de la Nouvelle-Calédonie sans sacrifier la stabilité économique du pays, mais en exploitant mieux les avantages comparatifs de la production calédonienne. Et là, vous me permettrez de penser que si la situation de départ, qui est la situation actuelle, où l'économie est largement fermée, et quand elle est ouverte, c'est principalement pour échanger avec la métropole qui est à 17 000 km avec des frais de transport et des contraintes réglementaires fortes. Cette situation n'est pas idéale. Donc je pense qu'il est absolument salutaire que la discussion ait lieu. Ensuite, il n'y aura pas de Big Bang, mais je pense que ça serait dommage que l'économie calédonienne se prive des possibilités que peut offrir une meilleure intégration dans le contexte régional, avec des garde-fous pour protéger la stabilité économique. Et c'est là que la CNC, d'ailleurs, joue un rôle important pour éviter que cette ouverture de l'économie, si elle a lieu, permettent à certains acteurs d'avoir des comportements abusifs. Et ça, c'est le rôle tout à fait de l'autorité de la concurrence, d'être là pour anticiper et sanctionner. Et la deuxième chose, c'est que les autorités de concurrence sont aussi là pour éclairer le débat de manière concrète. Donc moi, je vous incite vraiment à lire ce que nous, autorités de la concurrence nationale, nous avons écrit en 2019 sur les économies d'outre-mer, où on avait, je crois, un diagnostic très équilibré et qui mettait bien en évidence des questions réglementaires, des questions fiscales, des questions de salaire. Ça a été mentionné, mais c'est évident que ça fait partie des causes de la vie chère dans tous les territoires ultramarins, notamment les salaires des fonctionnaires. Et nous avions des pistes avec une série de recommandations très concrètes. Nous sommes en train de refaire cet exercice à la demande du ministre Valls sur la Martinique, dans le cadre du protocole sur la vie chère en Martinique, avec un travail qui sera publié en fin d'année sur la distribution alimentaire en Martinique pour identifier les blocages et les facteurs de marge excessive. Donc nous, on est dans le concret. Donc je vous invite à lire notre production et on continuera ce dialogue avec la CNC pour les aider à identifier des exemples concrets où on peut progresser. Mais vraiment, essayons d'éviter les débats idéologiques. Je pense que ça ne nous mènera nulle part.
Merci, Benoît. Roberta, would you like to pick up on the question? Maybe that was more directed to you earlier.
Oui, merci aussi. J'essaie en français, même si je suis plus habituée à parler d'économie en anglais. Mais pour une solution à l'OMC qui soit win-win, le conseil, c'est discuss. Come to the WTO, get engaged in the discussions. What we see, clearly a small economy will have to create coalitions in order to be heard. But it is essential to participate and be not just wait for the other to make rules, but propose and then start from there. That's the way in which you strike right balances between what we have commitments and for rules and so on, and also what we discuss, flexibility, preferences that allow you to implement commitments at your pace, for example. in a way that you get the gains of the commitment without losing the credibility of your policies at the same time. So engage in commitment, engage in negotiations, and of course you don't get anything if you don't commit. It's a give and take, and that's the balance. So it's never perfect, but it's the way in which cooperation works.
So thank
Pascale,
you.
if I just may add something to that.
Sure.
So Roberta was talking about win-win between the countries, and I'll address the win-win within the country among different categories. And you can't have win-win at the same time. That happens only over time, and you need to have a social contract in a country to discuss what is the time period you want and how do you want to achieve it. So it is possible, but you need to have transparent governance, you have to have accountability, and you need to have really strategic thinking about it. Just coming vertically and protecting one sector or a few sectors is not going to achieve that. And I just want to comment on, in general, in medicine, we accept that we will not use antibiotics for every single problem that a patient has. And it is the same for trade policy. We know when trade policy can be effective for which problems and where it cannot. And so I think we should approach using trade policy with the same sort of concern, because sometimes it can do more damage than help. Thank you.
Liza.
Tu voulais finir?
Non.
Oui, pour répondre à la question, une façon de mesurer le protectionnisme, c'est de regarder un peu à quel point les échanges de la Calédonie ne sont pas diversifiés en termes de partenariat. On a des partenaires habituels et on n'a pas beaucoup en fait de partenaires si on se compare à d'autres économies de la région. Et en soi, je ne suis pas en train de... l'idée n'est absolument pas de cibler qui que ce soit, mais les sujets là qu'on discute, en fait, ils sont complexes parce que ils sont au croisement entre politique industrielle, politique de concurrence, politique commerciale. Donc je rejoins ce que disaient les collègues, ça prend du temps. Mais par exemple, et d'ailleurs ça rejoint ce que je disais tout à l'heure à propos du besoin d'évaluer en fait ce que l'on fait. Alors, ce n'est pas nous qui le faisons, ce sont les politiques, c'est leur travail. Nous, le nôtre, c'est de proposer notamment des méthodologies pour évaluer au fil de l'eau ce qui est fait. Est-ce qu'on a choisi les meilleurs outils de politique étant donné les objectifs qu'on se fixe? Est-ce qu'il y en a d'autres? Quels sont les coûts à payer? C'est important. Et par exemple, en matière de politique commerciale protectionniste, on a des tarifs, enfin des droits de douane, et puis on a des mesures plus quantitatives. Mais rien qu'entre ces deux familles d'instruments, les droits de douane sont généralement moins pires que les restrictions quantitatives. Et donc, il y a tout un tas de questions comme ça à se poser, mais il ne s'agit pas de dogme, justement. Il s'agit d'aller mesurer, parce qu'on n'a jamais vraiment fait, sérieusement, de façon approfondie, d'aller mesurer l'ensemble des dispositifs qui sont en place et les alternatives. Et non, on ne les connaît pas complètement. Et... pour ce qui est, il me semble que vous parliez aussi de ça, oui c'est ça, de développer des opportunités à l'export, enfin de trouver des solutions qui soient gagnant-gagnant. Je ne crois pas qu'en si peu de temps, on va apporter toutes les solutions. À mon avis, si le travail qu'on a entamé aujourd'hui est réussi, on va aboutir avec quelques éléments de réponse et beaucoup d'autres questions. Et un programme de travail pour continuer ces discussions-là. Mais il y a quelque chose qui me paraît important quand même, c'est que si on souhaite en Calédonie développer des opportunités à l'export, si on se dit, bon, alors on va faire des affaires avec les partenaires régionaux, c'est ce que disaient aussi les collègues, give and take. On ne peut pas avoir comme ambition, enfin si on peut, mais je ne pense pas que ça va fonctionner, on ne peut pas avoir l'ambition d'aller développer nos activités sur les marchés de nos voisins si nous, on n'ouvre pas, en fait. Et je suis encore une fois pas en train de dire qu'il faut tout ouvrir. Ça mérite en fait un travail approfondi, peut-être un séquençage. Et pour revenir à votre question, quels sont les secteurs qu'on pourrait recommander, qui seraient win-win? On peut faire des propositions, mais justement, tout l'enjeu de ce colloque, c'est de réunir à la fois des académiques, voilà, des gens dont le métier c'est la recherche, des entrepreneurs, et puis aussi des personnes qui viennent d'organisations internationales, des personnes qui ont négocié des accords commerciaux, pour croiser les points de vue, pour faire ce qu'on est en train de faire là. Mais il me semble que la réponse à la question, elle repose aussi sur vous, sur les entrepreneurs, sur le fait de savoir quels sont vos blocages, qu'est-ce qui vous bloque, quels sont les secteurs dans lesquels vous pensez que vous pourriez peut-être peut-être tester un peu plus d'ouverture, que sais-je. En tout cas, la réponse, elle appartient aussi aux entrepreneurs. Nous, ce qu'on peut proposer en recherche, c'est de faire des analyses critiques. C'est ça notre travail, en fait. Proposer des outils de suivi, d'évaluation au fil de l'eau. Et je pense que ça n'a pas été fait jusqu'à présent, mais il n'est pas trop tard. Et puis, oui, voilà. Oui, mais voilà, il y a un cocktail après. On continue à discuter complètement. Non, on n'a pas tout ce qu'il faut encore.
Oui, non, mais on va arrêter parce que voilà. Donc. So I think we're gonna call it a day. And Roberta, Mia, and Benoît, thank you again, and thank you also for agreeing to pick up on the comments and questions at the end. And wish you, the three of you, a very good day. And also to the people in the room, I think it set the scene for the discussions tomorrow, which I also hope are going to be nuanced with different perspectives on the different issues, so that we can indeed come to some kind of hints and potential areas to explore further in order to find practical implications for New Caledonia. So thank you, and enjoy the evening and the cocktail. Bye-bye.